Before the thunder of war, before the trenches carved scars into the earth, there was a man born of wind and water, a son of the Ojibwe Nation, raised among the forests and the endless horizon of Georgian Bay. When the world called its sons to fight, he stepped forward, not only to defend a distant empire, but to fight for recognition, for dignity, for his people's rightful place in a land that often refused to see them. His name was Francis Pegahmagabow, soldier, sharpshooter, leader, legend. To some, he became a ghost in the trenches. To others, a symbol of courage that no war, no prejudice could silence. This is his story, a story carried by the wind, remembered by generations, and told once more. So the spirit of the warrior never fades. Before we begin, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to support more stories like this. Stories of courage, history, and the voices that shaped our world. The First World War is often remembered for its endless mud and relentless cold, for the shattering thunder of artillery, the choking grip of poison gas, and the lines of men, young, frightened, dutiful, who clung to life behind tangled skeins of barbed wire. The world at war was a place where dreams dissolved into the drizzle, where brotherhood and suffering were inseparable, and where every passing hour could mean the difference between life, death, or something murkier in between. But within that chaos, some stories carved deeper trenches than any shell or shovel. On a sodden field, amidst the lashing wind and persistent rain, reputations were forged in a silence that could be felt more than heard. The war transformed millions, but among the teeming masses, one figure moved so quietly, so deliberately, that his legend grew to something almost supernatural. By the time the armistice echoed across Europe, Peggy was both myth and man, the ghost who haunted the trenches. Francis Pegahmagabow's tale does not begin in a muddy trench, or with the crack of a rifle in France. It begins with the wind and the land on which he was born. His name, handed down from his Ojibwe ancestors, was Binaswi, the wind that blows off the lake. Born in 1891 amid the hardwood forests and rocky shores of Georgian Bay, Francis came into a world defined by the cycles of water, moon, and ceremony. Long before he donned a khaki uniform and shouldered a Ross rifle, he learned to listen to the rain, the trees, and the stories his elders whispered with reverence and warning. The story of Francis Pegahmagabow is more than a record of kills and exceptional marksmanship, more than the tale of medals and terrifying night raids. It is a journey from the edges of Canadian society, through the cauldron of war, and back again into a nation still struggling to reconcile its promise with its prejudice. His life, stretched across continents and crises, stands testament to the power of one voice, one spirit defying categorization, erasure, and silence. His legend began to grow because he was different, not just as an indigenous man in a largely white Canadian army, but as a person shaped by a culture that valued observation, patience, and precision. Instead of rushing blindly, he waited. Instead of brash words, he trusted silence, moving with every advantage nature gave him. To his comrades, he was a protector and a marvel. To his enemies, an invisible hand dealing sudden, deadly justice. When war erupted in Europe in August 1914, the world reeled with anxiety, declarations, and anticipation. Most Canadians knew little about the true nature of modern warfare, the machinery, the trenches, the psychological toll. Men signed up with dreams of adventure. Some sought glory, others escape. For Francis, the choice was more complicated. Indigenous Canadians were not initially welcome in the armed forces. Racism, suspicion, and centuries of broken treaties all stood in the way, but Francis would not be denied. With quiet determination, he arrived at the recruiting office, his eyes steady and his purpose unwavering. He was not marching off merely to fight European enemies, but to fight for his own dignity, for a country that, while dismissing his people, nevertheless called them brothers when trouble came. As the months crawled forward and Canada's sons crossed the Atlantic, the war revealed itself in endless new horrors, trenches oozing with filth and fear, fields of shattered poppies, skies so thick with shell bursts they seemed to bruise. By the time Francis reaches the line, the old traditions of war have been erased by machine guns and artillery. Heroism will no longer be measured by charge and saber, but by endurance, adaptation, and invisible acts of courage in the blackness between flares. Standing in the dusk of uncertainty, Francis Pegahmagabow becomes more than a man. He becomes a symbol of resistance, of survival, of hope. To tell his story is to traverse the tangled roots of Canadian history, to confront the harsh realities of Indigenous experience, and to honor the spirit that endures long after the last bullet has been fired. In the deep night of the war, when every breath could be a soldier's last, one name whispers above the rest: Francis Pegahmagabow, the ghost in the trenches, the wind off the lake, the eyes that see when others close theirs. His is the story we begin now, step by step, moment by moment, word by word, bringing light to silence and memory to the shadows. To understand the man who walked the trenches, we must first return to the land that taught him silence and sight, the shores of Georgian Bay, where a child named Benaswi learned to listen to wind and water. Francis Pegahmagabow's story begins long before he ever set foot on a battlefield, rooted deep in the ancient lands of the Ojibwe people who have lived along the shores of Georgian Bay for countless generations. Born Benaswi, the wind that blows off, his earliest days were marked by the rhythms of water and forest, the cadence of drum beats, and the quiet wisdom of elders whose memories stretched farther than history books could ever reach. He was born on March 9, 1891, in the Ojibwe First Nation territory, his world shaped by the harsh Canadian seasons and the enduring spirit of the Caribou clan. His father, Michael Pegahmagabow, was a respected member of this clan, but died when Francis was only 3. Soon after, his mother Mary left the family, leaving Francis to be raised by Noah Neba Maniquad, an elder whose teachings would become the foundation of Francis's character. Childhood for Francis was not easy. Loss came early, and adversity was his constant companion. But in the tight-knit Ojibwe community, every hardship carried a lesson, every challenge a reason to persist. Francis spent his youth learning the ancient ways, hunting with quiet patience, fishing in frigid lakes, reading the subtle tracks of animals through snow and brush. These skills, passed through countless generations, honed his senses, and forged a temperament marked by endurance and self-control. At sunrise, Francis listened to stories told in Anishinaabemowin, his people's language, tales of legendary heroes, of battles fought and lives lost, of the sacred duty to honor the land and its spirits. His world was bounded by forest, river, and dream, by the ceremonies that called to ancestors, and the prayers that sought peace for all nations. Though the land was rich, life outside the reserve was darkened by Canadian government policies that forced isolation and dependence. Indigenous communities were facing cultural erasure, poverty, and relentless prejudice. In Francis's earliest memories, there were days when food was scarce, when winter's cold tested both body and spirit, and when promises made by distant governments seemed neither meaningful nor real. But strength came from tradition. Francis's mentors taught that silence could be a shield, that endurance was more than survival. It was a kind of nobility. He learned to move slowly and surely through the woods, to watch and wait, to trust nature's signs. The lessons of a hunting ground would later become the tools of a soldier, but for now, they were simply knowledge, wisdom worn like a cloak against the cold. Francis did not learn his skills alone. Noah Nebumaniquad, his guardian, set him on the path not just of practical survival, but of spiritual understanding. The Ojibwe believed in the power of dreams, in the teachings of elders, and in the importance of humility. Francis absorbed these values, listening carefully, watching patiently, growing into a young man whose resolve was quietly unbreakable. By adolescence, Francis could navigate dense forests and open waters with confident skill. He worked in lumber camps and fishing outposts, earning modest wages but gaining priceless lessons about endurance and teamwork. Each season brought new challenges, but every challenge was met with the steadiness of a boy who had learned early to depend on himself and to honor his people's values. All around him, the world was changing. The forces of colonization grew stronger, with legislation meant to erase indigenous identities and break the cycles of tradition. Yet Francis remained anchored by family, by ceremony, and by a deep sense of pride. Pride in a lineage that had outlasted generations of hardship. Pride in the freedom found among the trees and lakes. Pride in being Ojibwe. In the quiet evenings, as the northern lights danced overhead, Francis must have wondered, as his people did for centuries, what role he was destined to play. He was a child of nature and of history, standing on the threshold of a world about to be shattered by war. But the wind that bore his name whispered of journeys yet to come, and a spirit that, even in the darkest hours, would never be broken. His early years were lived against a larger story, a country growing in confidence, even as it boxed out whole peoples. Before the call to arms came, laws and policies were shaping the life Francis would inherit. At the turn of the 20th century, Canada was a land of contrasts and contradictions. Beneath the sweeping claims of unity and progress, deep fractures ran through the heart of the nation. Divisions of language, ethnicity, ambition, and most painfully race. As cities grew and industries spread, rural communities and indigenous peoples bore the brunt of policies designed by those distant from their realities. For Indigenous Canadians, this era was marked by a struggle as profound as any battlefield conflict. The children of First Nations carried their heritage through a maze of government legislation meant to assimilate and diminish. The Indian Act, enacted in 1876 and amended often, dictated almost every element of reserve life, restricting movement, imposing guardians, and denying basic citizenship and property rights. Residential schools, supported by church and state, uprooted thousands of Indigenous children from home and kin, seeking to expunge language, ceremony, even the memory of family. Under government supervision, Indigenous people needed permission slips to leave their reserves, to sell goods, to work, or to vote. Ceremonies sacred to the Ojibwe and others, sun dances, potlatches, healing rituals, were outlawed, while traditional medicines and songs were scorned as signs of backwardness. Into this world, Francis Pegahmagabow grew into youth, wary of the demands and restrictions the government imposed on his people. He heard stories not just of hardship in the forests and on the lakes, but of broken promises, treaties signed and then forgotten, demands for land and resources that never seemed to benefit those whose ancestors had lived there for millennia. Every family had tales of humiliation, the reserves, often on marginal land, the Indian agents strict and unforgiving, jobs hard to find and impossible to keep without outside approval. Despite mounting pressure to assimilate, Ojibwe communities like Francis's stood firm in their traditions. They gathered in secret to share stories and songs, passing down a knowledge the government tried to erase. Francis learned as a boy that his language was a powerful act of resistance. Every word spoken among family, every dance performed on starry nights, was a refusal to be controlled. As Francis approached adulthood, Canadian society was obsessed with the idea of progress and civilization. Politicians and newspapers offered prideful praise for technological marvels and the British Empire's civilizing influence, but rarely acknowledged the suffering imposed on those left outside these narratives. The 1911 census counted a thriving country, but within that count, Indigenous people were barely visible. Numbers included, but voices ignored, marginalized not only economically but literarily, legally, and culturally. The outbreak of war in 1914 exposed these hypocrisies even further. Canada, swept up in the fervor of empire, called on its sons to fight for freedom, democracy, and the rights of the oppressed. Recruitment posters filled cities and towns, urging brave men to sign up for king and country, promising glory and respect. But for Francis, and for thousands of First Nations men, the reality was different. Indigenous people were told, at least at first, that this was not their war. The government's own military recruitment offices often turned away would-be soldiers based on race. Officials feared that the white men's war would be complicated by Indigenous participation, worried that alliances with the British Empire would become tangled if colonial subjects were seen sharing the ranks with First Nations fighters. Rumors spread through the reserves. Some recruiters sent away Indigenous men with barely a word, insisting on purity in the regiments. Others allowed them in only grudgingly, forced to sign up under Irish or Scottish names, stripped of the right to wear their own decorations or insignia. Francis saw all this with open eyes. He watched as neighbors debated the meaning of war. Some saw a chance to prove themselves as equals. Others feared it would bring only more heartbreak and injustice. Elders whispered caution. The wind does not favor all journeys. Yet Francis felt the pull of something larger, a stirring within that would not be silenced by bureaucrats or boundaries. He understood that the battle for respect, for recognition, was not simply physical. It was moral, cultural, spiritual. To serve his country, to stand shoulder to shoulder with men from every corner of Canada, would be to demand the dignity his people had been denied for generations. It was a question not simply of fighting for territory overseas, but of fighting for a place at home. In 1914, as war swept the world into chaos, Francis prepared to make a decision that would forever change his life and the fate of his family. The challenge was massive and the prejudice daunting. But for Francis Pegahmagabow, the wind blowing off the bay carried only one message. The time had come to fight, not only for victory but for respect, belonging, and the enduring pride of the Ojibwe people. When the world demanded sons and soldiers, Francis walked to the recruiting office not for glory but for dignity, and found himself tested by prejudice even before the first march began. The summer of 1914 was unusually hot in Ontario. The winds carried rumors from faraway Europe, whispers of assassinations, declarations of war, the mobilization of millions. Francis Pegahmagabow paid attention to these stories, not as a distant bystander, but as someone quietly weighing their meaning in the tapestry of his own life. Though government policy and casual bigotry declared Indigenous people unwelcome in Canada's army, Francis saw the war as more than an event in distant lands. It was the threshold to recognition, a chance to challenge the boundaries imposed on his identity and his nation. Francis walked the long road to the recruiting office alone. Most local men had already signed up, swept by the tide of patriotism that washed over Canada's remote towns and city neighborhoods alike. The nervous hush inside the office, the clatter of typewriters, the crisp uniforms, all these things must have struck him as both foreign and familiar, echoes of a world built on ritual and belonging. At first, the response was cold, indifferent. Francis's Ojibwe heritage was plain in his features, his mannerisms, the music of his name. Some clerks looked away, unsure how to handle Indigenous volunteers. Others eyed him with suspicion, as if valor and loyalty could be measured by skin or lineage. But Francis's resolve was unshakable. With a calm voice and unwavering gaze, he declared his intention to fight for Canada, for his people, and for a recognition long withheld. After persistent appeals and support from non-Indigenous neighbors who vouched for his character, the doors opened. Francis joined the 23rd Regiment, Northern Pioneers, a unit known for its grit and resilience. He surrendered his civilian clothes for a scratchy uniform, took the oath of allegiance, and began to learn the rhythms of military life. Training for the war was a mixture of old and new. Francis adapted to drills, marching by column and file, learning to respond to the barked orders of sergeants. Days were spent on marksmanship, field tactics, semaphore communication, and endless route marches through fields and forests. For most recruits, these lessons were new and difficult. Francis, however, found them curiously familiar. His years in the woods had already taught him patience, stealth, and precision. His hunting skills translated effortlessly into sharpshooting excellence. Despite institutional racism, Francis quickly earned the respect of his peers and superiors. During target and practice, he routinely outperformed much older and more experienced marksmen, setting records and earning quiet nods of admiration. He was methodical in his approach, never bragging or seeking credit, but always ready to help others improve. He was like the wind, recalled one fellow trainee, moving quick and light when nobody was looking, but impossible to ignore when he chose to act. Beyond the range, Francis excelled in fieldcraft, navigation, signaling, camouflage. He taught younger soldiers how to read animal tracks, how to determine wind direction by the rustle in distant trees, how to judge distance by the sound of thunder. His bony hands, tough from years of work, were gentle on his rifle, careful and precise in maintaining his kit. The difficulties of training were not only physical but emotional. Away from the comfort of home, from family and traditional ceremony, Francis sometimes felt isolated. Letters home were infrequent, and language barriers made some interactions awkward or painful. Yet he persevered, finding allies among other outsiders, immigrants, minorities, working-class farm boys who had little more than determination and hope. In rare moments of solitude, Francis remembered his childhood on the bay, the lessons of Noah Nebumeniquad, the Praed of the Elders. He carried a small pouch with sacred tobacco, a reminder of the strength he drew from ancestors now watching over him. Before battle drills or rifle practice, Francis would whisper a prayer into the wind, asking for guidance and protection, seeking the clarity that only tradition can bring. As autumn cooled into winter, the time for deployment approached. Francis and the men of the 1st Canadian Infantry Battalion boarded ships bound for England, hearts pounding with the anxiety of the unknown. For most, the coming war promised adventure, perhaps glory. For Francis, it was a journey not only overseas, but into the depths of his own spirit, a test of everything he had learned, everything he had promised to his family and to his people. The voyage across the Atlantic was grueling. Soldiers crowded into cramped bunks, seasick and anxious, filled with speculation about what awaited them in Europe. Francis kept to himself, watching the horizon, determined to honor the sacrifices made by everyone who had helped him reach this point. Upon arrival in England, training intensified. The muddy fields and chill air felt unnervingly similar to home. The Canadians were drilled relentlessly by British officers, forced marches, bayonet exercises, endless inspections. By now, Francis was more than a recruit. He was a symbol for his community, living proof that resilience comes not from privilege, but from heritage, endurance, and faith. And then finally, in February 1915, Francis Pegahmagabow stepped onto French soil. Behind him lay forests of memory and ceremony. Ahead, the shivering trenches, the constant danger, the opportunity to etch his name into the annals of both Indigenous and Canadian history. From drills on home soil to the shell-scoured fields of Europe, the voyage changed him from a woodsman into a hunter of a different sort. In the mud and mist, his sharpness would become legend. The cold mud of Flanders, the sullen roar of distant artillery, and the choking stench of gas marked Francis Pegahmagabow's first days on the Western Front. Fresh from training, hopeful and terrified, Francis entered a world where the horizon was nothing but tangled wire, shattered trees, and the pale, unending agony of trench warfare. He had crossed an ocean to arrive at the edge of history, bringing with him a quiet resolve and the lessons of the Ojibwe forests. War was never what the young men had imagined. The trenches were not lines of dashing heroism. They were graveyards before their time, carved deep into the earth, crowded with the living and haunted by the dead. The nights were long and restless, marked by the ceaseless rattling of machine gun fire and the distant screams of wounded men. Francis quickly learned to move unseen in this new landscape, relying on instincts honed in a childhood spent stalking deer and outwitting the icy winds of home. As the months passed, Francis's skill distinguished him from his comrades. Where others struggled to endure, Francis adapted. While some cowered from sniper fire, Francis embraced the silence between shots, his soul as steady as the wind after rain. He never boasted, never drew attention. Instead, he watched and waited, patient as the cold stars above. The landscapes of war, ruined villages, devastated farms, muddy craters, became another wilderness to read and understand. Sniping on the Western Front was a deadly game of patience, nerves, and extraordinary accuracy. Francis's marksmanship was unmatched. He crawled through no man's land, sometimes spending hours pressed into damp earth, his hands numb, breath shallow, every muscle tuned to the rhythms of danger. For many, the nerves would give way to panic. For Francis, calm and focus were second nature. Each kill demanded everything: a precise calculation of distance, timing, the wind's movement, and the patience to wait for a target that might not appear until dawn. The numbers earned by Francis Pegahmagabow defied belief. 378 confirmed kills, 300 enemy captures. Yet numbers only tell part of the story. Behind each shot was not only the skill of a hunter, but the resolve of someone who saw every enemy through the prism of survival, not hate, but necessity. He protected his fellow Canadians, but he bore no malice. War had made enemies, but Ojibwe teaching cautioned restraint and respect even in battle. Francis's method was unique among snipers. Where others picked a partner, a spotter, to confirm kills and scout targets, Francis worked alone. He trusted only himself and the signs he read from nature, just as he had done in youth. In the woods, silence is safety. In the trenches, solitude is sometimes life itself. As a result, much of his deadly work is recorded only in the hauntings of memory, the rare admissions of survivors. He moved like a ghost. We never saw him, only the aftermath. His reputation grew quickly. To his comrades, he was an invisible shield, the defender who could silence the machine gun nest that threatened them. To his enemies, he was a legend, a name whispered with fear, an omen of death. Some Germans called him the Spirit, for no patrol ever returned from searching for the Canadian sniper in no man's land. Fellow Canadians, many raised in the city, scarcely understood how he survived. Francis would slip away in darkness, crawl for hours, wait through freezing rain, and return only when the risk had passed and the job was done. Francis Pegahmagabow's body was hardened by years of work. His mind, disciplined by tradition and hardship, could endure what others could not. The traditions of his people, the patience of the hunt, the reverence for the land, the subtle reading of sign, found their highest expression in the most dangerous moments of war. Where most soldiers dreaded the call to go over the top, Francis accepted it as a test, relying on calm breath and quiet faith. No medal or citation could fully capture the daily ordeal endured by snipers on the Western Front. Every bullet spent, every hour spent motionless in mud, Every life taken was both a victory and a burden. Yet Francis bore these burdens with dignity, never losing sight of what mattered: the men beside him, the promise made to family, and the hope that one day stories of indigenous heroism would be told with pride, not apology. Battle names would come and go: Ypres, the Somme, Passchendaele. But the moments inside them were where courage was tested. Here are the scenes that forged his reputation and saved lives when it mattered most. From the very beginning, Francis Pegahmagabow's tour on the front was marked by acts of rare bravery. The months and years he served would push him into the center of some of the war's fiercest combat, where every decision could mean life or death for hundreds caught in the inferno of battle. His legend grew first at the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. The world gasped as German forces unleashed chlorine gas on Allied lines for the first time in history. In an instant, the trenches transformed into choking chaos, men clawing at their throats and stumbling blindly for safety. While panic swept the front, Francis remained clear-minded. He helped guide terrified soldiers away from the poison clouds, carrying messages, coordinating movements, and staying at his post long after others had fled. For hours, Francis risked exposure to lethal gases, refusing to abandon his duty until every life that could be saved was safe. His courage allowed Canadian forces to regroup and counterattack even as the casualties mounted. In the Battle of the Somme in 1916, Francis's resilience was tested again. Under relentless artillery and relentless rain, he moved between posts, delivered messages under intense fire, and took up his sniper's watch in the spaces where the enemy threatened to advance. Francis's skill was not just in killing, it was in guiding reinforcements, watching the flow of battle, anticipating enemy movements, and refusing every urge to panic. That year, a wound to his leg nearly ended his war. Rather than return home, Francis recovered with determination, resolved to rejoin his battalion at the front as soon as he was able. The Passchendaele offensive in late 1917 became another proving ground, a maelstrom of mud, shell fire, and shattered hope, where thousands died for inches of ground. Canadian lines, stretched thin and near collapse, depended on men like Francis to maintain contact between scattered units. Through nights thick with mists and screams, Francis crawled from trench to trench, keeping flanks intact, leading lost reinforcements to safety, even as bombs fell and bullets slashed through earth and sky. His acts of heroism earned him his first and second military medal bars, recognition reserved for only the bravest. Nor did Francis rest with these victories. In the battle for the Scarpe in August 1918, his unit teetered on the edge of disaster, nearly encircled by German fire, with ammunition running desperately low. Francis rose without hesitation. Under a hail of bullets and the concussive blast of shells, he dashed across open ground to bring vital ammunition back to his comrades, risking everything to save them from certain annihilation. In this moment, Francis's legacy crystallized. Bravery measured not by force, but by sacrifice. Heroism born of loyalty and love. Repeatedly, Francis moved through the most dangerous positions on the Western Front, never flinching, always returning. He guided parties of prisoners back through no man's land, navigated the chaos of lost patrols, and carried critical messages for superiors. Each mission, each success might easily have been his last, but Francis persisted, trusting the skills and the spirits of his ancestors to guide him forward. In every battle, he fought for something greater than himself. His heroism was a shield for those around him, a beacon to those who despaired, and a mark of pride for his people. His story remains, in the words of those who served beside him, not just a tale of survival, but the very definition of duty, honor, and the unwavering strength of the human spirit. Medals are small things, yet they speak to great risk. For acts of steady bravery, Francis earned honors few receive. These ribbons mark not vanity, but duty fulfilled. Francis Pegahmagabow's service was more than remarkable. It was legendary, punctuated by honors that only the bravest and most relentless earned on the blood-soaked fields of World War I. Yet perhaps the greatest measure of his character was not only in the medals he received, but the humility with which he wore them and the integrity he maintained throughout his life. Within the Canadian Expeditionary Force, Francis stood out as one of a select few Canadians, just 39 men, awarded the military medal with 2 bars. The significance of this achievement cannot be underestimated. The military medal was established to honor acts of gallantry and devotion under fire. To receive it once was rare. To receive it 3 times placed Francis within the highest tier of battlefield heroes. His first military medal came after the chaos of Ypres and the Somme. Orders cited his great bravery and success in carrying messages through the most dangerous zones. A selfless runner who shrugged off gunfire and gas for the sake of his fellow soldiers. The first bar, awarded for his actions at Passchendaele, one of the war's most brutal and merciless encounters, recognized Francis for keeping touch with flanks and guiding reinforcements through flooded shell craters under fire. Battalions depended upon his cool head and sharp eyes, as despair and confusion threatened to break even the toughest men. The second bar arrived after the ferocious confrontation at Oryx Trench near the Scarpa. Francis went over the top under withering machine gun and rifle fire, bringing back ammunition for a company cut off and nearly surrounded by the enemy. His courage, endurance, and composure saved lives, inspiring those whose hope was running thin. Beyond the military medals, Francis also received the 1914 15 Star, the British War Medal, and the Victory Medal, each testament to his dedication and skill, his willingness to serve from the earliest to the final moments of the conflict. But official commendations tell only part of the story. Francis's greatest honor was the respect he earned from his peers. Officers and enlisted men alike described him as a quiet leader, a man who led by example in moments of fear and doubt. When others hesitated, Francis stepped forward. When uncertainty threatened the mission, Francis brought order through calm and bravery. He was promoted to the rank of Sergeant Major, a role that required not just technical skill, but the moral authority to inspire and guide others. He became known as the man you want at your side in the darkest night. Around campfires and in hurried letters home, men spoke of the Ojibwe sniper, whose patience never failed, whose courage never wavered. In the larger history of the war, Francis's decorations would be enough to make him a household name. But for Indigenous soldiers, even the highest honors came shadowed by systemic inequality. Some historians argue that Pegahmagabow, had he not faced institutional racism, might have received the Victoria Cross, the Empire's highest award for valor. Instead, his legend grew among those who remembered and those who told the stories in secret, waiting for a nation to catch up with the truth. For Francis, medals and ribbons were never the measure of his worth. He wore them with pride for his family, his community, and the generations who would come after. But their deeper meaning was in every promise kept, every life protected, every act of quiet resistance that showed the world what true heroism could be. Where no one expected miracles, stories grew. Soldiers shared whispers of a ghost who watched the night. Legend and fact braided together, and a myth took hold. As the war dragged on and the body counts rose, stories about Francis Pegahmagabow began to circulate beyond his battalion. He became a figure of myth, the ghost in the trenches, whose very presence seemed to bend fate and defy expectation. Among his own men, his legend was built not just on marksmanship or medals, but on an unexplainable aura, the feeling that danger shrank in his shadow, that luck followed his silent march. Men swapped stories about Francis under blankets in freezing billets. They claimed he could spot enemy scouts in total darkness, hear a whisper across miles of shell-torn ground, or slip through barbed wire and mud as if he were composed of air and memory. German soldiers came to know him too, speaking of a Canadian sniper whose bullets seemed to arrive from nowhere, who vanished into the mist just as their patrols closed in. For all his deadly efficiency, Francis inspired trust and camaraderie among those he served with. He never glorified violence, never boasted of his deadly skill. Instead, he remained steadfast, leading with modesty. At night, while others trembled and prayed, Francis could be found quietly checking his rifle, reciting prayers to his ancestors, or sharing a morsel with a frightened new recruit. The ghost was not just a killer, he was a protector. The men who owed their lives to his marksmanship sometimes joked that Francis didn't miss because he had the moon on his side, or that Ojibwe spirits walked with him, covering his tracks and guiding his shots. Moments of levity softened the darkness, proof that even in the hell of war, community and legend could still take root. Time and again, Francis found himself volunteering for missions none would dare, scouting enemy positions before dawn, retrieving the wounded under fire, carrying crucial messages when others faltered. These stories passed from unit to unit, growing with every retelling, until Francis was not just a soldier but a symbol, the living embodiment of endurance, silence, and hope. Officers relied on his intuition, his uncanny ability to sense a trap or spot a sniper's nest before shots were fired. Young men learned from his steady manner, his way of moving through danger without arrogance or panic. He became a mentor, a calm guide, proof that wisdom can be a kind of armor against despair. In quieter moments, letters arrived from home, tales of family, memories of powwows, and songs around winter fires. Francis wrote sparingly, preferring actions to words, but every story he shared spoke of duty to his people and pride in their traditions. His resilience and kindness became as legendary as his marksmanship. Long after the war ended, veterans remembered Francis not only for the lives he took, but for those he saved. The friend who reached safety because Francis held off an enemy advance. The frightened boy who found courage in his presence. The unit that survived the night because the ghost was watching. His legend, built in the crucible of conflict, remains proof that heroism lies not only in power but in patience, in the quiet acts of goodness that turn fear into faith. Homecoming was never a single moment of triumph. For veterans like Francis, it was a return to complex truths, a hero to some, and still other to others. The real battles were only beginning. When the final guns fell silent and peace returned to Europe, Francis Pegahmagabow and his fellow soldiers boarded ships back to Canada. They came home changed, older, quieter, many carrying wounds that would never fully heal. Some returned to ticker tape parades, others to quiet towns and anxious family reunions. For Francis, the reception was a mix of respect, uncertainty, and subtle heartbreak. His home, the Ojibwe First Nation territory, was waiting. The community gathered to honor their hero, and elders spoke his name with pride. Yet, beneath the celebration lingered the old realities, a government slow to recognize indigenous sacrifice, a nation hesitant to extend equal rights to those whose blood had been shed for king and country. Though Francis had fought bravely and endured more than most men could imagine, he was not guaranteed the respect or support his deeds deserved. The transition from soldier to civilian was fraught with unseen battles. Francis, like many veterans, carried the burdens of trauma and memory, the thunder of shells in dreams, the faces of fallen comrades, the invisible weight of loss. Yet unique to him was a sting of returning to a system that still thought of him as other. Government agents questioned his mental health, branding him a mental case simply because he fought for his people's rights with the same resolve he'd shown on the front. Despite all this, Francis persisted. He began to speak out, advocating for the welfare of First Nations communities, demanding fair treatment and the fulfillment of broken promises. He gathered his experience, his wounds and honors alike, and translated his battlefield bravery into a lifetime of activism. Francis became chief of the Perry Island Band, serving from 1921 to 1925. In times of crisis and negotiation, his leadership was marked by the same steady wisdom and the same resistance to injustice that defined his service abroad. Life at home wasn't easy. Government restrictions on reserve life remained harsh, and opportunities for employment, education, and land ownership were painfully limited. Francis continued to work odd jobs, laboring, fishing, guarding, munitions plants during the Second World War. He helped raise a family in the old ways, teaching his children the traditions, language, and strength that had sustained him. Through negotiation and defiance, Francis pressed for better conditions and greater autonomy. He clashed repeatedly with Indian Affairs bureaucrats, never afraid to call out injustice. Newspapers sometimes mocked his activism. Local authorities sometimes undertook punitive measures, but Francis refused to be silenced. Every speech, every petition, every meeting was an act of courage, a fight for dignity that demanded both heart and patience. Neighbors and family remember him as a peaceful man, quick to help, slow to anger, always ready with a story or a laugh. He lived humbly, giving more than he took, his medals kept in a box, his pride in service found in the love and respect of those around him. In 1943, Francis became Supreme Chief of the Native Independent Government, an early First Nations political organization. Though beset by political pressure and limited resources, Francis's voice reached far beyond his own community, inspiring other Indigenous leaders across Canada. He died in 1952, aged 61, a hero in war, a fighter for justice and peace, his memory cherished by family, by the Ojibwe Nation, and by all who believe that courage lives on, long after the uniforms are hung and the medals packed away. If the front had been fought with rifles, the next fight would be fought with petitions, speeches, and unshakable resolve. Francis turned battlefield courage into leadership for his people. After the echoes of war faded, Francis Pegahmagabow turned his battlefield courage into a lifelong mission for justice. No longer armed with a rifle, he drew strength from his words, his traditions, and a relentless belief in the dignity of his people. The battlefront had shifted. From the trenches of Europe to the negotiation tables, council halls, and government offices of Canada. As chief of the Perry Island Band, Francis advocated for his community at every opportunity. He demanded fair treatment from Indian Affairs, pushing for improvements in education, land rights, healthcare access, and cultural preservation. His approach was tireless. He attended countless meetings, drafted petitions and resolutions, and debated officials who dismissed or ignored Indigenous concerns. Francis's activism was rooted not only in his pride as an Ojibwe man, but in his vision for future generations. He saw that survival meant more than subsistence. It meant restoring respect, opportunity, and the right to self-determination. He rallied his neighbors, encouraging them to learn their history, speak their language, and pass on traditions threatened by decades of colonial suppression. He often clashed with government agents who accused him of disrupting their order. The label troublemaker followed him, but Francis wore it as a badge of honor, knowing that to be silent meant surrender. The battles of his post-war life were fought with persistence, as patience, and a willingness to endure criticism if it meant progress for his people. His work extended beyond Perry Island. Francis joined coalitions with other Indigenous leaders across Ontario and Canada, sharing strategies and building the networks needed to challenge state control. In 1943, he became Supreme Chief of the Native Independent Government, a position that gave him a national platform, but also drew greater scrutiny from officials threatened by the idea of united Indigenous resistance. Francis's activism was uncompromising but not bitter. He spoke with a calm voice, his stories filled with humor and warmth. reminding others that the struggle for justice could coexist with joy and generosity. Family members remember him sitting at council fires late into the night, advising young leaders, recounting tales from both the old country and the front lines, urging patience and pride. In every fight, Francis drew on the wisdom of his ancestors, the practical lessons of survival, and the spiritual teachings of his youth. He was a bridge between worlds, soldier and chief, activist and storyteller, living testament to the power of endurance in the face of adversity. His legacy and advocacy lives on. In every Indigenous council, every movement for fresh water, better schools, protected language, and honored treaties. Those who follow Francis's example know that courage is not spent in a single war, but renewed in every act of resistance, every quiet teaching passed from parent to child. Away from meetings and the headlines, he was first a father, a teacher, a keeper of stories. The quiet practices and ceremonies at home kept his spirit whole. Francis Pegahmagabow's life was enriched not only by duty and activism, but deeply shaped by bonds of family and the wisdom of Ojibwe tradition. In the quiet moments away from meetings and struggle, Francis found solace in the company of loved ones, his children, his spouse, his extended family, and elders who kept the flame of old teachings alive. He was a father who was attentive to his children's growth, passing on the skills and stories that defined him. Around the family table, Francis taught the art of patience, the necessity of resilience, and the value of humility. When storms swept across Georgian Bay, he gathered his family close, reciting tales of the wind, the same spirit that gave him his name, Binaswi, the wind that blows off the lake. Family members recall how Francis encouraged curiosity and wonder. He took his children fishing and hunting, teaching respect for nature and the importance of taking only what was needed. He spoke of ancestors and the meaning of ceremony, explaining the rituals of tobacco offerings, drum circles, and dances that honored life in its many forms. He believed in harmony, in finding peace amidst conflict. Francis's spiritual views were rooted in the interconnectedness of all living things, a worldview that shaped his leadership and his resilience. In conversations with elders, he explored dreams, sought guidance, and reflected on the teachings that sustained the Ojibwe people through generations of trial. Even during the challenges of post-war life, Francis advised his family and friends to be strong but gentle, to forgive but never forget, to protect tradition even as the world changed around them. Through hardship, Francis's wisdom was a beacon. He reminded those who struggled with prejudice, poverty, or loss that unity was strength, and that the spirits of the land listened to honest hearts. When faced with decisions, he prayed for wisdom, trusting that answers would come through humility and patience. His legacy to family and community was simple yet profound. We have to live in harmony with all living things in this world. Words passed from father to son, mother to daughter, woven into memories, ceremonies, and the unbroken history of the Ojibwe Nation. Francis's spirit lived not in the medals on his chest, but in the love he gave, the teachings he shared, and the example he set for all who follow. Memory takes many forms. Statues, songs, stage and page, each reshapes a life into something a nation can hold. The stories we tell determine what we choose to remember. Francis Pegahmagabow's memory endures long past his lifetime, spreading far beyond the boundaries of Perry Island or the trenches of Europe. His story has been carried forward in art, history, and music, rekindled in the hearts of those who refuse to let true heroism be forgotten. Across Canada, tributes rose up to honor him. On National Aboriginal Day in 2016, a life-sized bronze statue of Francis was unveiled in Parry Sound, Ontario. It stands watch over the landscape he cherished, bearing his likeness, an eagle by his side, a Ross rifle in his grasp, and a caribou at his feet, a tribute to his service, his ancestry, and his enduring leadership. Community members gather to reflect, leave offerings, and teach their children about the warrior who became a legend. His name echoes in music. The acclaimed metal band Sabaton released A Ghost in the Trenches, dedicating the song to Francis's exploits and his haunting presence on the battlefield. Proof that courage can become folklore, transcending generations and genres. The music carries his story to listeners worldwide, blending the rhythms of war with the heart of resistance. Storytellers have taken up his narrative as well. The celebrated musical Sounding Thunder, The Stories of Francis Pegahmagabow, has toured Canada, bringing together performers, descendants, and veterans to celebrate his life through movement, word, and song. Audiences watch, moved by scenes of Francis as warrior, leader, father, and child, the cycle of a life rooted in tradition and transformed by adversity. Literature bears his mark. Joseph Boyden's 3-Day Road, inspired by Francis's life and spirit, became an internationally acclaimed novel, drawing readers into the harrowing experience of Indigenous soldiers, their heroics, pain, and quiet strength. Historians and authors weave his story into biographies and documentaries, restoring his place among Canada's greatest warriors. Even currency considered his image. In 2020, Francis Pegahmagabow was a finalist as the face of the Canadian $5 bill, recognition of his historical significance and ongoing influence in national consciousness. Every year, on Remembrance Day, his name is invoked during school assemblies, Indigenous ceremonies, and gatherings of veterans. Teachers recount his bravery, organizers highlight his activism, and families share his lessons of endurance, community, and peace. Francis's legacy is found not only in public tributes but in private moments. Children reading about his life, veterans recalling his memory, leaders invoking his spirit in battles for justice today. His story is a bridge, connecting past to present, Indigenous wisdom to global recognition, the silence of a sniper to the song of an entire nation. We began with a wind that named a boy. We end with that same wind carrying his name into the future. A lesson in endurance, dignity, and quiet courage that asks us to keep listening. The life of Francis Pegahmagabow stands as a testament to endurance, dignity, and the power of quiet resolve. His journey from the shores of Georgian Bay to the mud of Flanders and back again is not only a story of war, it is a tale of resistance and hope in the face of relentless adversity. Through battles at the front and struggles at home, Francis embodied values that transcend time, patience, courage, and an unwavering devotion to family and community. His legacy is woven into the fabric of Canadian memory, shining as an example of what it means to honor one's roots and stand for justice. In every act of heroism, Francis broke barriers, teaching the nation to see beyond prejudice and to recognize the worth of every human being. His story calls upon us to remember not just the medals and the victories, but the spirit that can survive when all else is threatened by darkness. For Indigenous Canadians and all who fight for dignity, Francis is a guiding light, a reminder that the quest for respect and truth never truly ends. The traditions he protected, the language he spoke, the wisdom he passed down, each endure as living gifts for generations yet to come. For every child who wonders what courage means, for every leader seeking the right path, Francis's legacy answers simply, we must live in harmony with all living things. Today, the memory of the ghost in the trenches is kept alive, in statues, stories, songs, and in the beating hearts of those inspired by his example. To tell his story is to remember the best of what humanity can offer, the quiet strength to endure, and the unending hope for a better world. As the wind off, Georgian Bay continues to blow, so too does the spirit of Francis Pegahmagabow, far beyond the fields of battle, through families and nations, always moving, always watching, always guiding us towards harmony, peace and truth. The story of Francis Pegahmagabow is more than history. It's a reminder of courage that endures through generations. From the quiet forests of Georgian Bay to the mud and thunder of Europe, his spirit stood for strength, dignity, and honor, proof that true heroes often walk in silence, guided by purpose, not fame. His legacy lives on in every act of remembrance, in every story told to keep his name alive. But there are countless other heroes, men and women of World War I and World War II, whose stories still wait to be heard. Tell us in the comments, which hero story should we bring to life next? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling these powerful stories of courage and history. Share this video with others so together we can keep their memories alive and their voices echoing through time.